In my experience of being around uh, spiritual practice and things, there's a lot of maneuvering that tries to happen in this. And a lot of it is that the person wants to indulge the positive, let's say, thinking, and reduce the negative thinking. So often they'll come to something like whatever yoga as like a tool of self improvement. Let's say, hey JB, um, now this is the thing. The head the head presents itself as in duality. So there's two-ness, yeah? The main two-ness obviously being that it's presenting you as the ultimate subject to all the objects. But the head is also presenting itself in this two-ness of good and bad. So there's great positive thoughts. So a person may want to enhance those or indulge those or try to steady those, steady their life in the positive. And then there's negative, which they seemingly want to get away from. You see, now the head is already, that's obviously a production of two, so that's a duality. The thing is, they come from the same house. Both characters, let's say positive thoughts and negative thoughts, come from the same interpretation center of the mental system. Yes? So if one is indulged, you're indulging whatever the head is going to present you. This is one of the paradoxes, I feel, of the mental system. People want to have more positive thoughts, so they want to become more compassionate, and they want to become less judgmental, let's say. Yeah. So they try to put more weight on being the compassionate side of the mental, and they try to diminish the judgmental side. The thing is they both come from the mental system. So if I'm putting weight or belief in the compassionate, then when the judgmental pops up, I'm putting weight on that. Trying to stop being judgmental would be the same as trying to enhance compassion. The attention is still going to the system. That's amazing. So, by trying to stop judgmental thoughts, I'm actually giving them a bunch of attention, essentially. And the judgment is coming from the same mental system that the compassion is coming from. This is what I've noticed in my own life. If I indulge one, I'm indulging the other when it comes because it's coming in the same system. You see, it's arriving through the same interpretive center. So this is saying not two. So if the head is presenting to you as two, positive and negative, that would be not you. Yeah, that would be negated. Who is that arising to? And you step that back. Because there is the one, the seeming one, who is giving the idea that some thoughts are positive and some thoughts are negative. Now, if that's the case and you're going with that, then you're going to try to enhance the positive and get away from the negative, let's say. Yeah. Right. But really the bondage is before that. It's from the meaning giver, which would be the I or the identification. Yeah, that would be the bondage of self, and that's what's giving meaning to the good and the bad. Because the mental system can't be two. That wouldn't. It's like when a bunch of teachers would say, "Well, what are you then? Are you the good thoughts or are you the bad thoughts? Are you two things, or are you one thing?" You see, it doesn't make sense. But in it not making sense, that's the power of it, I feel. And in my experience, it's removing faith in the whole movement. So whether the head presents positive thoughts or negative thoughts, I noticed this really early in recovery when I would sit to do meditation stuff, is if I didn't put weight on the thought, no matter the contents of that thought, I would be able to stay at least a step back from it. So whether I was thinking about lunch or something that terrible that happened in my childhood, if they were both just seen as thoughts, essentially, yeah, then I wasn't giving a bunch of weight to that content. Now at the time that was super useful, although I didn't see that I was the one doing that. I thought I was the one who was doing that, who was labeling those thoughts. Yeah. So, but it's the idea of removing that labeling which gave me a little bit of space from it. I don't know why that came up, but I was just thinking about that today. Because I feel a lot of people are trying to indulge or enhance positive thinking, what they are labeling as positive thinking, and then reduce negative thinking. But the thing is, it all comes from the thought center of them. You see, they're the one giving that the meaning. And the mental system is just, it's playing as if it's two things, but it's one movement in my experience, yeah? It's one movement. Even the idea of you seeing the thoughts. You can only really think one thought at a time. So there's a thought that comes up, if it's like ticker tape, like these pens, there's a thought that comes up, then there's another thought right away that says, I'm seeing that thought. That's one system. It's one mental system. It's just happening very fast, one after the other. It's not two things. So it can't be really split into this good and bad. If you're trying to enhance the good and you're trying to get away from the bad, you're still giving tons of attention to the mental system. And then you're stuck there as the one giving tons of attention and trying to determine what's good and bad, you see. Sorry, I'm just reading what you wrote here. Disregard all thoughts. Negate would be the movement, I would say. Yeah? Negate. Because you're not the one doing the thought, yeah? So the thing is when thoughts come up, really it's inquiring to who that thought arises to, because that's the bondage of self. Yeah. The idea of you is one of those thoughts, essentially. And it's not a consistent thought. It's not a permanent thought that's there all the time. It comes and goes as contents comes and goes. So this is one of the tricky things, Vagabond. If you disregard all thoughts, you're still there as the one who's disregarding thoughts, yeah? You still being there is still the bondage. Can you see that? It's the same as like if you're labeling thoughts good and bad. There's the sense that you're the one there sitting there who's doing that labeling, yeah? There has to be the sense of you being the one who's doing the labeling, otherwise you wouldn't be able to label, you see? So if you go to disregard thoughts, then you're still there as the one who's you're there as the disregarder, essentially. Yeah? Which is not true. There is no disregarder, there is no self. But the head is going to place you there in that seat as a self. Yeah. The movement would be negation. Yeah. You're not doing the thinking in the first place. So if you go to stop it, then you're putting yourself in the seat of being the doer again. Yeah. So if thoughts come up, the inquiry is to who does that thought arise? Yes? To who does that thought arise? If you try to stop thinking, you're still there as the one trying to stop thinking, you see? You're still sitting in the seat, the imaginary seat before the thoughts, essentially. That's not true, but that's kind of the stance it takes, yeah? Right. So if you were to cease thinking altogether, that would be you doing a lot of stuff to try to stop thinking, which would be thinking. Not sure. Okay. Outline how negate thinking. You see it as not you, yeah? So, it's just like I'm saying here with self-inquiry. In self-inquiry, in self-inquiry, when something pops up in your experience, the inquiry is to who is that arising? So if a thought comes, to who is that arising? The answer right away would be me. Yes? Then the inquiry would be, from where does that arise? Or who am I? And then there's a pause there. You don't do anything, and then something else arises. To who does that arise? Yes? Right. So essentially whatever pops up in your screen of awareness, let's say, would get negated in that way. because anything else is an affirmation of self, of the sense of individuality. So if you're the one, if you're there disregarding thoughts, that's only reaffirming that you're there as the disregarder of thoughts. If you try to cease thinking, yes, then you're there as the one who's trying to stop thinking, which binds you to being the one, the self, individual, let's say, the sense of individuality. Do you understand? So any movement that's taken aside from self-inquiry is only going to reinforce the relative individuality, which is not your absolute nature. It's relative. And there's nothing inherently wrong with it, but it makes life very uncomfortable because it's relative. Yes? So how to negate thinking is to see that whatever pops up in the screen of your attention, would get negated as not you, essentially. So if I see something, who is it that's seeing? I am. Now you're back in the I, and there you go. Now you're inquiring into that I. Ooh. You see if the I is a thing. Any all thought is met with who is it that the thoughts are rising to? Yeah? Who is it that's asking me these questions right now? If this was in person, you would say me. Yes? And then I would say, who are you? What is that inside the body? That would be another thought. Yes? So that would be something that comes and goes. The idea of you is just that. You and I are at best ideas, thoughts or concepts in the mental system. Now that suggestion is suggesting that you're an independent, permanent thing. And that's what not to philosophy is negating. So it's not trying to better the head. It's not trying to even get rid of the thoughts. It's just inquiring to who it arises to. Because if you're there as the one that thoughts are arising to, that means you're the subject and the thought is the object, and that places you in a position of duality. Yes? That is relative. It's in relation. So that would be your relative nature. Yes? That would Jay's relative nature is the seer of the thoughts, let's say. Now, that seership of the thoughts still has Jay bound to the thoughts. So whatever the head presents, if I'm the seer of the thought, I'm still bound to individuality, and that gets very uncomfortable. So it's not just any all thought, it's the contents of your experience gets inquired. Who is that arising to? Who is the feeler, the taster, the toucher, the seer, the hearer, the thinker? Yeah. It always comes back to me or I. What is that I? Yeah, who am I? Where does that come from? What's the source of I? And then you'll see you are not that I. That I is a mental movement, which presents a sense of subject to all the objects. But that sense of subject is a false sense of subject. It's like it's a false god, as Ramana would say. Yes? So it's entangled with the objects. Even though it's saying, I'm an independent individual, that is not the case. This body is not independent, permanent individuality. It is entangled with what's going on. Yes? Although it's very confident in itself that it is. Your head is very confident that it is the subject of all the objects and that it is independent or individual from those. And it is not. It is that would be playing false god. Yes? And that false godness makes things very uncomfortable. When everything doesn't seemingly go your way. So if you then go to make a move to stop that thinking, you're only reifying that sense of individuality. Falsely reifying it, but it's getting reified, the attachment to it, yes? So as Ramana would say, the only real thing that can be done is self-inquiry. To whom does that arise? I. And then he might say something in some writings like, you land in your chest somewhere, yeah? So then you look inside the chest, search, whatever, investigate. What is that I? Is that a permanent thing? Because everything in life comes after that I. Everything. All the thoughts, feelings, emotions, world, meaning, everything comes after that I. So if that I is not real, in the sense that it's an independent, permanent thing, that would be really good to know. Mm-hmm. And if it's not your inherent nature, that would also be very, very good to know. Because if you're living as that I, you're very entangled with everything that's going on, including the thoughts which are coming up. Now, the thoughts that are coming up are taken to be your thoughts, yeah? Because we get entangled with this sense of I. Mm-hmm. And when a thought comes up, the next thought that happens is that that's your thought, that you did that thought. But if you sit down and look at the thoughts, you start to notice, like I noticed when I would get seriously depressed, my thoughts would go up and down really fast. So I'd get really like high and then I'd get really low. Well, there was a few times when the head essentially overplayed its hand. And there's no way I was doing it because it was happening too fast, you see. So that gave me a little gap. I remember that one night, actually. That gave me a little gap in that mental system because I saw that I wasn't doing it. Later down the road in recovery, when I heard this message of not to, or Advaita, let's say, when you sit and inquire into who those thoughts are arising to, and you see that that I thought is just another thought, and that there's simply really nothing there before the stream of thoughts, you see that you're not doing any of these thoughts. That all these thoughts are like a programmed movement. And, that gives you a lot of relief from that, as not being the doer of it. The doer or the done to. The thing is, any move we make, but aside from inquiring into who is the thinker, who is the feeler, only reinforces that I-ness. Yeah, so that's why you might, if you read Ramana's stuff or other, even in Chan, they're talking about how practice is actually reifying what you're not. It's actually reifying your suffering. Because when you sit down to meditate, your head has you stuck as the meditator. When you go on retreat, now you're the retreater. When you seek for freedom, now you're the seeker. And this is just all this bondage placed on this I, yeah? Yeah. So if you see that the I is a non-existent thing, meaning it's not an independent, permanent thing, as soon as your head goes to seek, yeah, you know that you're not doing that movement. So it would turn down the volume a lot on seeking and the rest of the mental contents, essentially. JB. Sounding like the no self of Buddhism. Exactly, Vagabond. There is no self. Yes? Self is more like an action. It's like a constant mental action, which is getting... There's a bunch of stuff going on right now. You're seeing, you're hearing, you're feeling, yeah, tasting, touching. When that action happens, the head is placing you as the one it's happening to over and over again. That repetitive action would be suggesting that there's a permanent thing that this life is happening to. And that's what this is negating. You see? Self-inquiry is essentially negating the sense of self. When you inquire into who is that arising to, it says I, who am I? That's a negation of the self. Yeah? Because there is no self. This is the thing. The head is presenting the constant idea of self over and over again, but there's no thing there. Yeah? Right. No nothing. So if there is no self, what is there? You know what's the name? JB. What is there is to be rediscovered, let's say. Yeah. To talk about the absolute, or the absolute nature or true nature, or the big S self, as Ramana would say, would only try to put form on the formless. Yeah, it's quite useless to talk about what we are, to be honest, because it's just a misunderstanding or a mistranslation of it, and it distorts what we are. So really, if we're looking at we're really looking at duality. So we're looking at duality so it can be negated, which is like what we were just saying with Vagabond there, yeah? So that when things pop up, it's like Ramana said, the only thing that needs to be done is to see what is unreal. Because you already are reality, yes? So being reality ourselves, the only thing that is really you can do is see the unreal as unreal. Right? So what is there? We are all one. Is that the idea of non-duality? I would just not worry about any of that, to be honest. Yeah, and inquire into who is it that wants to know if we are all one? Is that the idea of non-duality? Who wants to know about non-duality? Yeah. It's always going to come back to the I. But any label or talking about the absolute is only ideas coming from the sense of individuality. And the sense of individuality cannot get the absolute. It just cannot put it, because it's a formless no thing, yeah? Your head can only know things in a way, or ideas or concepts, let's say. It can't turn around. Like individuality can't turn around fast enough to get what you are. It will keep trying to do that, yeah? And keep putting all these names and things on it. So non-duality, yeah, is not two. So it's a saying whatever's popping up in two-ness is not you. Yeah? So the I, which we could say is like the first thought, the sense of I, right there, that puts you in a position of two. Because if there's an I, then there's an other. Yes? This is it. So if there's a one, that would suggest that there's a two. Yeah? So oneness isn't even it. The idea that we are all one as a concept is useless, because that comes from a dualistic farm. Yeah? Walking around going, we are all one, we are all one, we are all one, and trying to get your head to become not a system of two doesn't work. Yeah? Yeah, so I hope maybe that answers a little bit, JB. Right on. Goomba. That's a good question, though, because it arises, if there is no self, yes, then what is going on? Because it certainly feels like there's an individual self, yes? Your experience right now would be experienced as an individual self, let's say. So there's something which is suggesting, let's say, that there's an individual, a permanent thing inside this body called J. A permanent, unchanging individual. So it's what we had said before. It's not that there's a permanent, unchanging individual, but there's a stream of thinking, yes? And that thinking, part of that thought stream, is that there's an individual that's arising to. Except it's constant in a way, until it's seen, yeah? The thought stream is constant. The eyes see something, they interpret its meaning in the mental, and then it suggests you're the seer. Hearing. It interprets the sound, that's a car, and you're the hearer of the car. This happens super fast. This would be the claiming of the mental system. of what's going on. Yes? Hmm. Right now, even the head could talk. I'm the one talking. Yeah. And I'm there as the one talking. That would be that would be the misunderstanding of non-duality. Yeah. So when you're looking at no self, you can also look at doership. There is no doer thereof of what's being done. Yeah. So there's this stream, this mental stream going on, and it's constantly suggesting that all of these things are happening to you. Yeah. Now that does not make that a fact, but it's a very constant, consistent stream. It's a bundle of thoughts, as Ramana would say. Yes. A constant suggestion that you're there, the one doing and being done to. So when you inquire who is that thought arising to, or who are these thoughts arising to, it steps you back from the stream into the suggestion thought of I. Ah. And then when you go, who am I? That stream pauses and you get a little snap. Yeah? And then the head comes back online. I just got to turn this thing off here for a second. Hold on. So when the Buddhists say there is no self, they're not saying it in a light way. There is no doer thereof. Yeah. So all these thoughts are happening without a thinker. Seeing is happening without a seer. Hearing is happening without a hearer. Capital A-R. Dumba. Yeah. So that's the doership, which has us tied to being the idea of being the independent individual self, let's say. Okay. Where or how does capital S self or capital A awareness come in? Yeah, big S self. Well, you are that, yeah? That's your true nature always. So the thing is, Vagabond, big S self or awareness, whatever you want to call it, it doesn't come in. It doesn't come and go. This is the thing. You are that. That is your nature. Now, one of the challenges of this is when I say you are that, what hears that is your head. And your head goes, okay, I am that. And when it says I am that, it's saying this body is awareness. And that is not the case, yeah? Consciousness is our true nature, let's say that. Awareness is our true nature. Right. But when the words happen, the head claims it, and it says, I am the one who's aware. And that is false. Yeah. There's no one who is aware. There's awareness, and you are that. Not as the body, but before the body. You see? So awareness doesn't come in because it's never gone out. Yeah? It's like presence, and then everything's happening within presence. You see? So that, if you look at that question, that's your mental system trying to get awareness or big S self. It's trying to understand this, which is really great because see that happen, that will only ever fail. Yes? So see that because that will only ever fail, the only movement here is negation. Because you already are what you're looking for. That's like a done deal. Yeah? So trying to understand where awareness or self is or when it comes in is only reifying the misunderstanding that it can be understood. And it's only reifying that you're not it now, and it's sticking you back to the head. There is no individual self. Big S self, like you're asking about, is only what Ramana refers to it as. Yeah? So there's no self, but there is self. Big S self. Yeah. There's a movement, a mental movement, which is called, many people would say is self, like a small S self. But it's not a thing, it's an action. It's like a constant action, which is suggesting that there's something there which isn't an action. Yeah, like a noun, as Paul Hederman would say. There's a bunch of verbing happening, and it's suggesting that you are a noun, and that is not the case. And when it suggests you as the noun, it's suggesting the body, that you are the body, and this is the noun. Yeah, that this is the permanent individual thing, and that would be false in this view. Yeah. So big S self is just what Ramana would call your true nature, let's say, or the absolute. When I use self, I use it in the small s because in recovery, self-reliance is what has failed us. Yeah, so small s self is really quite important. In recovery. So I don't use self in the big S way. Just to not get confused here. Small s, big S. So the small s self, yeah, the sense of individuality is relative. That's your relative nature. So if something's relative, it would be in relation to other stuff. Yeah. So it's not independent, essentially. Your thinking is not independent. You're not thinking those thoughts. Those thoughts are, in a way, produced and programmed by whatever maybe you've come in contact with, let's say. So those thoughts are not your thoughts, really, because you're not even doing them. It's like a habit pattern. Yeah? One of those thoughts, which is maybe the most incessant one, is that you are this body. And that when everything's happening, it's happening to you. There. Yes? Now the thing about the relative individuality is your head and my head, all of our heads, take themselves to be the absolute. So when my head interprets something through its past programming, it's taking that story to be what's absolutely happening. Woo! And then we're stuck in that story if we're identified with it, you see? So it's not always that helpful to look at it through the relative absolute lens, because the relative is not taking itself to be relative. It's putting itself in the position of the absolute. And we get identified with that relative. Yeah. Most people, pretty much everybody, is identified with their relative self. And that relative self is taking itself to be the absolute. So when your head says something, it's putting itself in the seat of absoluteness. So it's much more effective, I feel, in my experience, to see that you're not that. Yeah? Now, the idea that the individual existence exists within the ever-present is that's something you can sit back into. But if you meet that with the head, it's just going to put you back into the independence on what's relative. Yeah, it's better just to see that you're not it and negate. Negation is really the thing, yeah? Yeah. Okay. So say we get to this point of understanding. I'm just going to read this question quickly. Get to the point of understanding that or not to. So say we get to this point of understanding that or not to. Okay, what would understand not to, JB, would be part of not to. What understands this message is misunderstanding this message, actually, to be honest. You and I are not going to get this message. The head cannot become not two. It's only working in a system of two-ness, yeah? Self, small s self, individuality, cannot become not the sense of individuality. That's the ceiling, yeah? That's its limitation. Self cannot become a not self. So to think that self is going to have the understanding would be false, yeah? You would negate that. We're so with this idea and the fact that there's an imaginary self, because I assume you can't. Does it change the way you approach and interact with the world? It is a little bit of an unclear thing when it's written. If I could talk to you, it would probably be different, but to change the way you approach, interact with the world. Uh, it's hard to understand that in writing it a little bit. Your head's giving meaning to everything. I don't know how to come at that, to be honest. Yeah. You see, that question comes from the sense of individuality. So, this is why it's really. This is why it's negation. Because when your head tries to grab this, it doesn't get it. So when you're asking questions like, does it change the way you approach, interact the world? This body is in the world, yeah? The head is in the world. And it goes on. It's a programmed thing. You're not doing the thinking that's happening. Yeah? This is not in a way to change or better yourself. It's to be free from the movement. To see that you're not doing that. And then it can go on. It's going to go on, for sure. Yeah? Trying to change the individual, trying to change small s self does not work in my experience because it's programmed. You can alter it and it can move, but the limitation is low as far as peace is concerned. Yeah, so understanding would not give you peace and relief. Because understanding only reinforces the mental system and our attachment to that mental system. In recovery, they say self-knowledge avails you nothing. Knowledge of the head avails you nothing. Why? Because you're not the head. It's only reinforcing what you're not, essentially. You understand? This is the thing about these talks. You're not going to get anything here. There's nothing you're going to obtain here. If anything, blocks just get chopped off and they just fall. Yeah, that's how this has worked in this situation for myself. It's not about getting this. I don't have an understanding of non-duality. I see what I'm not, essentially. That has been shown to me. And you are already what you're looking for. So when you negate what you're not, there you are. When you negate the unreal, you land in what you've always been, reality. You see? How do we wrestle with this idea and the fact there isn't an imaginary self? Because I assume you can't rid yourself completely of the imaginary self. Who wants to know these answers, JB? This is your... Who wants to know this stuff? Yeah. The head, the mental system will try to wrestle with non-duality. It will try to understand and put it into a package of understanding. And that's only going to get blown up. And hopefully that's what happens. You try to understand this and you understand that you can't understand this. And then you feel like you're failing, yeah? Like right now you might feel like that question's failing. And in a way that question does fail. But guess what? You're not the one asking the question. So what's failing is not your true nature. It's your relative nature. This is why it goes back to negation. Who is asking the question? Yeah? Because the question is always going to fail to sit you back in what you are. Especially when they're kind of confusing. It lifts a lot of weight from this body because trying to understand or get free is a very heavy endeavor. Yeah? It's like mental weight is super heavy. And it weighs us down like crazy. So there's a lot of things that I used to care a lot about which no longer hold meaning for me that much. At all, really. Because the head was grabbing onto all this stuff. But you're not the head. So meaning is taken out of a lot of things. A lot of things. specifically the completely addictive nature to being this body, or maintaining this body, or saving this body, or all these. Yeah, there's tons of weight put on being this body. So you ask, does it change the way you approach or interact with the world? It's just like the head gives meaning to stuff. You see that you're not that head. So you stop going with it. Yeah? It's like relief. But you don't really have to do that much. It's like self-inquiry, settling down in the body a lot, and negating what you're not. Hmm. Hmm. I don't know if that helps, JB. I can only like share from my own, from what's gone on here, I guess. Yeah. Like, when I went into recovery, I was really out of options. I was very much out of options. So the head had failed me to a point where it had failed a lot. It was a rough situation. Yeah. So there was already a sense that this thing was not operating right because I was in AA. Yeah. So if this was firing, let's say, on all cylinders, like the guys I grew up with or something, I probably wouldn't be sitting in an AA meeting. Yeah. So that was pretty obvious that something was like off the hinge a little bit. Um, and in a way, that kind of helped lose faith in it. Yeah. Because you just see that the head is failing or it's misinterpreting all the time. So if somebody's asking like what to do, negation is essentially losing faith in the mental system. And when you go into recovery, at least from my experience of recovery, you see right away that you're the problem, except the you that you're taking yourself to be is not you. Self is the problem. Small s self is the problem. The mental system is the problem, let's say. And man, that's like a lot of relief, yeah. Because when the non-duality thing came through, you see that then you're not self, and what was defeating we essentially is not my nature, my true nature. It's like a programmed relative idea of what I might be. It's very vague, really. The idea of what we are is super vague in the head, and it's not very clear, and it's changing, and it's like anxious all the time. The head's a wild place to live in. So to see that if you're not it, that you can get out of it, yeah, meaning getting out of it being that you're not in it in the first place, that was like, I mean, that is like a massive relief, you know? So I can only like approach questions from that point of view, I guess. Mm, yeah. We're like little tornadoes, not solid, ever changing. Little tornadoes. Yes. This kind of is like a little tornado in a way. Yeah. Are there other questions? Because the questions really push things forward. Yeah. Mm. And that what I noticed was in spiritual practice also when I first went into recovery, like researching yoga and Buddhism and all these things, and then doing practices and whatnot. I didn't see that the individual self had taken like a new form. Like my head will adapt to the situation that it's in. Yeah. So now I was no longer like a depressed alcoholic. Now I was like a spiritual practitioner. And that was like my identity. But it's still chains. I'm still locked into the identification, you see? It just seems like it's more noble or something. So my head was now had me locked into a new position. spiritual practitioner, and then it had me locked into yoga teacher. Yeah. And yeah, it's almost like the head will take whatever situation is given and morph it into its own story, that now you're that thing. Yeah, but it's still bondage. It doesn't matter what seat you sit in, you're stuck to the seat if you're stuck to the head's bondage of it. This is the thing. Ah, man. Like, I noticed being a recovered alcoholic was still bondage in many ways. Because there's still the sense of the one there who's the recovered alcoholic. Yeah. So if I don't see that I'm not self, I'm bonded to whatever form or claim self puts on things. Yeah. And spiritual seeking is like a hard form of self, because people see it very as, oh, it's very noble. They're spiritually seeking, yeah. But really it can just be another addiction. You're just a drug addict for whatever, scripture, let's say. And so that doesn't give like the relief to me. But I've seen, like, my head will just take the habit patterns that it has and put it somewhere else. So now I'm not addicted to this idea, but I'm addicted to this idea. Yeah? Or now I'm not addicted to the duality idea, now I'm addicted to the non-duality idea. You see? It's just the head taking its same pattern and putting it here and here and here. It's what the head does. But it's still bondage. If we're bound to that movement, you're still bound. That's the thing. There's no freedom in being a non-dualist. It's bondage, 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 bondage. Yes? Ah. If you're there, the one who knows non-duality, you are bound. That is not the relief. There's not freedom in that. Which in many ways, spiritual practice and concepts bind people way more than if they were to just sell cheese on the street or something. You see? This is why it's important to see all the different ways that the head makes a move, because you're still bound. If you go to 100 Vipassanas to try to be unbound, but you're there as the Vipassana doer, you are bound. You're super bound. Yeah, because now you're the great Vipassana doer. And the head will still have you. So when we get triggered, we can ask who is triggered and do negation. Yeah, Noni, in a way, but if the house is on fire, you got to put out the fire first. So if you're coming from the world of recovery, if the emotional situation is too hot, if you go and try to inquire or negate that, it's only going to turn up the heat. Self-inquiry and negation are not great to use when the heat is hot. Yeah, if you're triggered, the heat is probably hot. So you've got to turn down that heat somehow first, like with skillful means. I don't know, you go for a run or you go do service if you're in recovery. I always talk about Zen Master Hakuin. If you're in the 12 steps, there's tons of tools in the 12 steps for the individual, no? This message is not for the individual so much. It's to be free from the individual, not as the individual. This is not a message to improve individuality. Yeah, if you want to improve individuality, you go to psychotherapy or you go do something else. Yeah. There's nothing wrong with trying to improve the individual, but you're never going to improve it to the point where it's not the sense of individual. And that's what I feel a lot of people are trying to do. There's a lot of people who think they're going to practice their way out of being an individual, yet the practice that they're doing is only reinforcing the individuality. So it would be really good to see that, yeah? Mm-hmm. So if you're triggered, it's not your absolute nature that's triggered. It would be the individuality, right? Yeah. So if it's really triggered, then you would do some individual stuff to settle that trigger down. So if you're in the 12 steps, you should have lots of tools already, because the 12 steps would give you lots of tools for that. Yeah. Psychotherapists have tools for the individual. I do. I always liked the Zen Master Hakuin thing in the past. I've done a little audio course on that. I couldn't put it on here, but I have it on my Bandcamp. So if you want that, I can send that to you. But like these things are for the individual, yeah? This message is not so much for the individual. It's seeing the individual and negating it as not what you are. Yeah. Because what you are cannot be triggered. You understand? What you are is disentangled from this body and mind situation. Ah. Unaffiliated. Unaffiliated. Yeah. In a weird way. Yeah, in a weird way. Not unaffiliated, but it's disentangled in a way. Yeah. Everything exists because of your absolute nature, but your absolute nature does not need your individuality to exist. So the cooling down, skillful means and stuff, yeah? To get the individual settled down, and then you can inquire. Who is it that got triggered? You know, who does the triggering even arise to? It's like this, yeah. But don't try to use non-duality to get out of individual situations because it will not work. It will not work. It will inflame that trigger a lot, because it will turn the head up. And when you're already triggered, you don't want the head to be turned up any more than it is, yeah? Mm-hmm. Yeah. That place right now. It wasn't working this morning. Makes sense. Yeah. Okay. Good. I'm glad it makes sense. Yeah. Hmm. All right. I'm just looking at the other things here. 12 steps. Would they apply to someone who's physically, mentally? Yeah, the 12 steps are used in AA, but they're not exclusive to AA. They're used by all kinds of things, but they were introduced to the world through the voice of AA or through the bodies in AA. Yeah. Would they apply to someone who's suffering physically and mentally? The 12 steps, I can only speak from my experience as an alcoholic, yeah. The 12 steps are a removing of faith from self, from the individual movement of self into a higher power. Yeah. Hmm. The 12 steps, in my experience, again, are for they enhance, or how could I say? They improve the individual's life, but not as a self-improvement tool. That's what is my experience with the 12 steps. If the 12 steps are used as a way to better self, they don't work that well. In my experience, I've seen that fail a lot. The 12 steps, as far as my life is concerned, it's a removal of faith in the individual self. Yeah, it's a removal of faith in the individual self. I'll answer that in a second. Jivan Mukta, nice name, Jivan Mukta. uh, yeah, that's what the 12 steps for me is. It's not a way to improve the individual. It's to remove faith from it, and in so doing, self gets improved. Right? Because we're giving everything all the meaning that it has. So when self is firing off at a crazy rate, yeah, if you're entangled with it, you're essentially helping it fire up way more. And when faith is removed from that system of self-centeredness, it gets aligned. Not by doing anything to it, but by removing faith in it. Which in a way is like what we were saying earlier. It's very helpful to see how the head fails and all the different ways that it fails. So essentially you can remove faith in it. Which in a way is a negation and is inquiry in itself. Removing faith. Yeah. You can see that your reliance on the individual system is not working. Self-reliance has failed us, like they say in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Mm-hmm. Self-reliance has failed us. So, yeah. I just mentioned that because I see a lot of stuff now which people are selling the 12 steps as a self-improvement program. And that is not what that program has been in my experience. It is a removal of faith from self and then a looking at how self has defeated us through the manifestations of self, mainly resentment in the 12 step program through step 4. You see how resentment, self centeredness, self seeking, all these different tactics that the head has used has defeated you. And in seeing that, you make amends for what you need to make amends for what came through this system. And you see that you were defeated by it, and then you lose faith in it. Essentially, you move that faith to a higher power. Yeah. So in self-inquiry, you're inquiring into that same sense of self in a way, and you're seeing that it's a non-existent thing. So what has defeated you is not you, it's a non-existent thing because there is no self. Yeah. Yeah. Uh-huh. So sure, maybe in that way it can help people who are not alcoholics, but trying to use it to improve the individual doesn't work in my experience. Because the head will take the 12 steps and it will morph it into its own little 12 steps, and that is going to reify a lot of stuff you probably don't want to reify. Mm-hmm. How is your view? Jivan Mukti, oh, Germany. How's your view on non-duality bypassing? Bypassing. I hear that a lot because I do embodiment therapy with people. In order for you to bypass Jivan Mukta, there would have to be something there to do the bypassing, yes? So let's say there's thoughts that you don't want to think, or thoughts that come up that you don't want them to come up. So there would be a you there who would be bypassing those, yeah? Saying, let's say those don't exist. Does that make sense so far? So for bypassing to happen, there would have to be a bypasser. Yes? If you're still there. If you're still out there in the universe. So, in order to bypass content, let's just say mental content for the lack of a whatever, there has to be a you there to bypass it, right? Bypassing can happen without a bypasser. There has to be something there to bypass. Otherwise, the gate is just wide open for anything to arise. Yeah. This is my experience with this. If you want to bypass stuff, this self-inquiry would not be a good tool to use. Because you are negating the sense of individuality, which is bypassing everything or trying to bypass things. Yes? This is seeing what you're not, essentially. It's seeing what is not the absolute truth. So in my experience, it actually opens the door to the contents of experience rather than shuts the door on certain things. Because what would shut the door on certain things is negated. Do you see? If you're not there to bypass, then the door is open, essentially. Yeah? So whatever comes up would move through the space of you without you grasping onto it. Yeah. Because in order for things to be bypassed, it's like in order for this to get pushed, there has to be something to push it. Yes? Let's say this thing that's pushing it is the sense of me. Well, this is negating that sense of me. So there's no longer the thing pushing it. Yeah, that opens the door. In a way, it's the sense of you and me which is keeping the gate closed on certain things that are trying to be bypassed. This is saying that gate doesn't exist. The gateless gate, as they would say in Zen. Yeah? That would open the door to the whole contents of experience. So if a thought comes up that would usually you'd want to get out of or you're trying to bypass, as soon as the head goes up and glitches against that thought, you are negating the glitch, essentially. Yeah? My experience of this is if you want to bypass stuff, this is not a good way to do it. Yeah? If there's stuff which is still trying to be bypassed, it would be worth looking at the individual through maybe psychotherapy or the 12 steps if you're an alcoholic or something. These things work on the individual, yeah? But if you want to get out of situations or you want to use non-duality as a way to, as like a get free from jail card or something, it doesn't work. It doesn't work at all. That would bind up your situation a lot more. Mm-hmm. So if bypassing can happen without a bypasser, I don't know how that would happen because there's no bypasser there, yeah? Mm-hmm. Because what's bypassing is not your absolute nature. That would be part of the mental system, which in this would get negated. Not destroyed, not denied. The things are still here, but it's negated as not your nature. So you're no longer grabbing on what it's suggesting. So even if your head was to suggest you should bypass those thoughts, you already know that that's not your absolute nature. You're sitting way before that. Mm-hmm. Absolute nature would be like spacious awareness. Spacious awareness is wide open to whatever might move through the sky, let's say. And then the idea of you comes in and it seems to place a permanent thing. Now this is going to control what goes through the sky and what can go through the sky and that is what causes the discomfort, which makes us want to bypass in the first place. I want to bypass thoughts because they're seeming to be my thoughts, yeah? If they were just thoughts, I wouldn't even need to bypass them, or feelings or whatever, yeah? Sensations. I want to bypass certain sensations because they're taken to be my sensations. That my is not your absolute nature. In this, that gets negated. You open the hand on that my. And then what's trying to bypass might make a move to do the bypassing, but you ain't it. So you're not going to give it much faith, and it's going to die quick because it doesn't exist in the first place. You understand? So then again, the open space is open. That's kind of my view on this as far as when people talk about bypassing. If you want to bypass stuff, there has to be something there to judge something as bad and judge something as good, in my experience. However subtle that may be. And in the not two, bypassing would be a movement of two. There's something to bypass and there's a bypasser, or the sense of being the bypasser. Both of those get negated. They're not destroyed or denied. They're negated as not what you are. And that would sit you back before them. It's like sitting behind a fish tank, yeah? And then what arises is what arises. And then the head might make the move to bypass, but you've already seen through that. Right. So there might even be insight that you're not the one who's doing the bypassing. And maybe that the bypassing is what's giving all of the life to the thoughts you don't want to think in the first place. And you're not that. And therein lies your freedom. You are already free. You've always been what you were looking for, yeah? That's my experience. Because I've seen people ask this question before. And then I say, go try it. Yeah, it's like in the big book. It's like if people wonder if they're an alcoholic or not. They say, oh, go try drinking again. So go try it. Go work with self-inquiry inside the body. Negate the sense of individuality. And then when something comes up you want to bypass, when the head goes to try to shut it off, negate that movement and see what happens. Yeah? The thing flies right through in a way. Yeah. This is not this whole thing is not a way to get It's not like a get out of life free card. Life goes on, yeah? The body, the mind, the actions, they all keep happening. It's just seeing that you're not the one they're happening to, which removes the motivation to want to bypass. I don't know if that helps, but that's my experience in this. Now, I've seen a lot of psychological techniques which definitely help people bypass. But that's a bit of a different story and just my silly, humble opinion. But this is not a way to get out of life or life's seeming problems, yeah? The individual has problems. I don't have enough money. I don't get this. I got a bike to do a thing tonight and it's snowing in Toronto like insanity, yeah? These are problems, let's say. They're trivial, stupid things, but you see? Right. This stuff goes on, yeah? It's just who is it going on to? This is it. It doesn't, oh man. If it doesn't get you out of life, whatever's happening is not happening to my true nature. And your true nature would be you, Noni. Yeah? So whatever's happening is not happening to you. And then the head goes, oh, this is all happening to me. Well, who am I? Who is that me? What is that I? Yeah? The solution to the problem is that there is no problem in a way. And then that opens even the door of, well, whose life is this? Who's been the doer of all that? Who had all the depression and who drank all the booze? Was that my true nature? I would heavily argue that it was not. Something moved through this, through a mental system, and it drove this thing into discomfort, and then that thing wanted out of discomfort, so it started drinking. Right. This is the power of the removal of doership, you see? What is being done to and what is doing is not you. Not you. There's no hub in the center of the wheel. There's just wheeling happening. When it's taken personally, it goes right out of whack. That's my experience. If you remove the personalness of it, it ain't so bad for the most part. Jeevan Mukti, if you have another question about that, please feel free to ask. That's my experience on the whole bypassing thing. This does not work if people are trying to bypass. Yeah. But just to come hit that one more time, I understand why people ask that question, because a lot of people, I feel, do come to the non-duality message as a way to get out of stuff. But I'm just saying it doesn't work. So millions of people can do stuff that doesn't work. Look at the world, yeah? Yeah. But it doesn't work, essentially. It just fails, and it causes probably more separation. What are the... Right, so whatever is happening is not happening to my true nature. Whatever has happened does not affect your nature. Whatever will happen will not affect your nature, and what's happening right now does not affect your nature. You see? And then the head will start claiming, and there goes what you're not.